I'm really excited today to speak with Joel Lee, who's joining me via Zoom from Singapore. He teaches conflict resolution at the National University of Singapore, and he does a lot of work promoting mediation in Singapore and across the world, actually. I think anyone who works in the mediation field at least knows of Joel if they haven't come across him at one of the conferences or online events. He's also, and one of the things I'm really keen to talk with him about today, a very experienced senior martial arts instructor. And one of the things that he's been writing about recently and probably thinking about for many years is the relationship between martial arts and mediation and conflict resolution, which might not seem obvious to everyone listening. The other thing that I love about Joel, he has a really bad reputation for sharing terrible jokes and puns.
Thanks for adding that last part. Thanks.
No, I always love watching on Facebook what the Joel jokes of the day. It's always very entertaining. So Joel, one of the things I was thinking about when I was thinking about martial arts and conflict is that in some ways, when we think about conflict and when we think about martial arts, often the first thing that springs to mind is fighting. And we think of them in almost a negative sense of fighting and war and the negative connotations. But both of them have a bit of a bad rap because they're not both about that, are they?
Well, I think, I mean, if we sort of just break down the notion of martial art, right? The Chinese character, and please don't ask me to write it. My Chinese, I look Chinese. That's all I can write Chinese at all. No, I can, but not very good at it. The Chinese character for martial art, which is wushu. If you take the Chinese character for wu, which means martial, and you may know that the Chinese characters are pictograms. In other words, in other words, they were actually kind of drawings that evolved into squiggly lines that became words, right? And one well, not theory, but one idea of the origin of the character Wu is to curb a spear.
Okay.
Or is to stop a spear, to prevent a spear. So I have it on good authority that actually the word for curb and the word for spear is actually combined in that character. So essentially, if you think about it, martial arts in its original form, at least was practiced as a form of either defense or health or discipline, depending on which tradition you come from. And fundamentally, it really is about either avoiding, preventing, or managing violence, right? And so actually, as a martial artist, as somebody who's in a sense spent, good grief, almost 3 decades of his life to serve the art, it really is never about fighting. And the irony is, of course, people take up the martial art. There's the young people, they take up martial art because they watch too many. Okay, I'll say Bruce Lee. I think you will know who that is, but many young people might not nowadays. But you watch the latest of Kung Fu movie, Jackie Chan, whatever. I'm really dating myself. And at this point in my life, Sam, I can only date myself. No one else will. But fundamentally, they usually join the martial art or take the martial art simply because that's what they want to do, right? They see the hero and they fight, and they do all this kind of stuff, and they do these wonderful things, and they can fight 10 guys and not be injured. I mean, it's just nonsense. That's just Hollywood magic, right? The Chinese have a saying that when 2 tigers fight, one dies, one leaves injured, and I think that really is more the reality of what the martial arts actually is, or when you're actually fighting, right? There's no way you will leave unscathed, but the fact is that you leave alive, right? Now, the interesting thing is when people start learning the martial art, as they get better and better, when you're the beginner, you tend to take offense in everything you see. You want to try your skills out. You want to prove yourself. So it's, in a sense, we could call it the ego, right? You're trying to prove that you're worthwhile, self-esteem, or you're better than someone else, ego. But as you get a little bit better and better, actually your desire to fight actually just drops. Your desire to fight disappears because you're like going, so somebody's looking at you funny. So what? So somebody's just insulted you. so what? Well, whether it's a real insult or perceived insult, right? I mean, we in communication and conflict studies, we know that sometimes we project things out even though it never really happened, right? But as you get better at it, you master yourself, and really then becomes a journey to self mastery.
Yeah.
The betterment of yourself. So in martial arts, then we actually talk about development, self-development, discipline. We even have something called Wu-Te. Wu-Te translated means martial virtues. So it's almost like a code of conduct for martial artists. Now, different Chinese arts have different codes of conduct, but essentially it is about how to be a upright, good person in society. You're not supposed to bully people. You're supposed to help other people. You're supposed to be a good example, and so on and so forth, right? So martial arts really is less about fighting than really about self-development, to my mind. Now,
so I'm hearing a couple of things there that I really love, that the martial arts is about kind of preventing harm rather than causing harm, and preventing violence rather than causing violence. And you need to have a certain level of skill and mindset to be able to do that. But the other thing I was thinking, at the moment, my social media for this month is all about the relevance of power to conflict. And what I'm hearing you saying is a lot of people start martial arts because they think of it as having power over, and it sort of builds them up and it builds their ego. But actually, as you get better at it and you become more knowledgeable and more skilled, it's more about power within that then allows you to manage outside things differently.
I think that's right. And sometimes, to be clear, if somebody is attacking you, I mean, and I have to defend myself simply because I can't avoid it, diffuse it, or run away, as the case may be. I will have to harm that person. I will have to disable that person in order to protect myself. And the assumption, I think, of most martial arts, to be frank, is that your opponent, the person who's going to attack you, is going to be larger and stronger than you. That's always going to be the assumption, right? And we teach this for self-defense for women. I mean, people my size, skinny, relatively small compared to many Westerners. The assumption is that you have to be able to deal with an assailant that's larger and stronger, right? And the reality of it is in order for you to do that, you have to end the fight. You can't keep it proportional. Now, how you end the fight is entirely up to you. You obviously don't have to kill the person. I mean, I've never killed anyone in my life. I prefer not to. That'd be bad. But you'd have to disable them, break something, sprain something, knock them out, so that you can actually make your escape. Right. So it's about relative safety. It's about relative. So I'm not saying that we don't do violence with somebody else in the martial arts, but we do as much violence as is necessary for a good cause. For a good cause, right?
And that reminds me of when we think in conflict, when we're looking at people's conflict styles, the sort of avoidance, accommodate, collaboration. We always talk in a way that collaboration is the best. If we can, we should try to collaborate at all times, and that we should never be competitive, or that being, very aggressive is sometimes something we should avoid. But there are times when you need to use power over to create the required, minimization of harm, for example.
But that's an interesting thing, you see. So if we start looking at parallels between martial arts and conflict resolution, for example, I think at the higher levels of conflict resolution, at the higher levels of the martial art, what we're really talking about is how do you master yourself, right? It's real interesting to me that in like, for example, in conflict coaching, in the field of NLP, and interestingly enough, what William Ury writes about nowadays is about self-mastery. It's about getting to yes with yourself rather than getting to yes with the other person, right? You can see the evolution of the books, right? Getting to yes, getting past no, right? Which is about difficult people and how do you use, jujitsu and all that, which itself is a martial arts analogy. And then sort of some of his later writings right now is getting to yes with yourself, right? It's sort of that internal management. And I think as a professional communicator, whether you're a negotiator, a mediator, a conflict coach, a lot of the time you have to be a master of yourself before you can actually even guide somebody else, right? I mean, that's part of the thing. So that's one thing. But the other thing about conflict styles, when we talk about avoiding and so on and so forth, right? So I think avoiding as a conflict style has a bad rep, right? People go, oh, what, run away. And we laugh a bit at it. But fundamentally, it's a survival mechanism, right?
Yeah.
So I've said to people before, if all the guy wants is your money, give him your money. Give him your money. That's all you need, right? If you can run, and that to me is avoidance. But there's nothing wrong with that. It's useful, right? Now, if you can't run because maybe the people you're with or you cannot run faster than the other person, then you have to engage them. That's fine. But even the way you engage varies. So, for example, we can say that we talk about collaboration, right? And it sounds a bit strange to talk about collaboration in the context of a martial art. But here's what collaboration looks like. The best way to diffuse a fight is to make a friend, right? So I have literally bought people drinks, okay, and pretended as I pat them on the back and I pretend, and I go, I haven't seen you in years, blah, blah, blah. Obviously this must be plausible, right? I haven't seen you in years, how have you been? And let me buy you a drink. And then we just, end up swapping faster. So that's collaboration as far as I'm concerned. You're diffusing it. You're seeing from their point of view, you're taking whatever their anger is or whatever their thing is, their issue is, and either sort of diffusing it or distracting them, right? Which is another way of doing it. But the other thing about collaboration, and this was captured a little bit in Fisher and Yuri's book, Yuri's book on Getting Past No, is the idea of negotiation jiu-jitsu, right? Where the other person is being aggressive at you. While we sometimes think about using power over that person, right, to overpower that person, actually, in the art that I do, and in many of the what we call the softer arts in the martial arts world, like Wing Chun, which is what I do, Aikido, Jiu-Jitsu, and so on and so forth, it's actually about diffusing their force, dissolving their force, without necessarily doing them harm. It's like somebody pushes you and then you turn to their side and look at it from their perspective, which is a lovely metaphor from a conflict resolution idea, right? Yeah. So if someone pushes me or grabs my hand, I'm going to go, oh, okay, you want my hand? I'm not going to pull back. I'm not going to take, you want to grab my hand? Grab my hand. I'm going to go where you want to go, but then I'm going to direct you somewhere else. So obviously you have to have the skill, you have to have the confidence to do all that, and that comes with frameworks and skills and practice, obviously, and experience. But even when we decide to engage, we don't have to engage in a competitive sort of destructive. And I understand competition is not necessarily destructive. I get that, but sort of in the sort of a pushback, overpower sort of way. It can be engaged in a hey, okay, all right, you're looking over there. You want me to look over there, so I'll look over there. What are you seeing? Oh, I get it. Now, since we're looking over there, I'm just going to take your force and move it there. I want to look over there. Now, what are we going to do about this, right? So that's sort of I think one of the key things about the martial arts, as well as conflict resolution at a very high level, where basically it really isn't about overpowering the other person. It's about actually claiming your power. But you can be powerful. In fact, you're probably most powerful when you're not trying to actually assert power over somebody else, right? Yeah. But then we're getting into sort of Kwai Chang Caine territory right now, and that reference might be lost on you.
It probably is lost on me. You better clarify a little bit. I'm assuming it's something like mindfulness or something. Is that where we're going? No.
Kwai Chang Caine is from the character from played by David Carradine in the TV series Kung Fu. But you would be way too young to remember that.
I'm much younger than you, Joel. Let's be honest. But thanks for saying so.
You're most kind.
So I think a couple of things that I'm hearing is much like with the different conflict styles, none of them are right or wrong. It's about choosing the appropriate one in the appropriate circumstances and trying to minimize harm as much as you can, given whatever the circumstances are. And you're saying that's a very similar thing in martial arts, that you have a repertoire of different moves, maybe that's literal in martial arts, that you can make, but it's choosing the right one to cause the minimum harm necessary for whatever it is that the purpose is.
and that's not just an aspiration. It's in most countries a legal requirement. You generally have to be proportional to defend yourself.
Yeah.
So generally, I mean, the law's a little bit upset with you if you sort of, go a little bit overboard. Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
Moderation, everything in moderation. I think.
Yes, yes. And being able to make that choice in the moment requires internal confidence and that level of mastery to be able to take that moment and say, okay, what is the appropriate choice here, rather than just defaulting to whatever your habit is in that particular moment.
Yes, and I think when we're talking about things like that, we have a number of allies and we have a number of enemies, in a sense, metaphorically. Habit is an enemy, but actually habit is an ally. So if you can train your skill such that the desired action or response is the habit itself, then that's what you respond, right? Obviously, if your habitual response is when someone pushes you, you push back and get aggressive, that's not the helpful response, that's the enemy. And the idea is, how do you let that go and learn and train another habitual response, right? So that's one way of thinking about it. The other way of thinking about it, which is equally true for anything, is that you must be in a place of balance. And because generally when you are unbalanced, and I don't mean mentally, but I suppose it could be mentally. By the way, if you see me swaying right now, that's because I'm sitting on one of those exercise balls. So I'm literally unstable right now.
I did notice you bouncing a little bit. That explains why.
That's right. There's nothing nefarious about this. It's just the fact that I'm sitting on a ball. That's my story, Sam, and I'm sticking to it.
Okay.
And let's not talk about this. No. But the idea is balance comes from two things. Firstly, you need to be physically balanced, right? So anybody who's done a sport, or anybody who's done even singing, strangely enough, is that actually if your center of gravity is low, right, you are more stable. I mean, scientifically, that's just that's not disputed. And if your CG is high, okay, you feel a little bit more unsettled, right? Now, strangely enough, even though we have the same body shape at every point in time, your so-called CG, your center of gravity, can change. Because, for example, if you adopt a slightly more stable stance, a wider stance, you sink your weight a little bit, you become physically more stable, right? And that leads then to the notion of mental stability. And again, that I don't mean crazy, not crazy. And I know nowadays we don't use those words. What I actually mean is how calm are you in your mind, right? And so I make 2 points here. The first point comes from NLP, where the idea is we say the mind and the body are actually systemically linked, right? So a balanced body can lead to a balanced mind. Similarly, a balanced mind can lead to a balanced body. It is systemic. You can't help that, right? But the other thing about the mind is we say that the place in a hurricane that's most calm is actually the eye of the hurricane. So you always want to be in the eye of that hurricane, not the hurricane itself, right? And so martial artists, even sports people, it's not limited to martial arts, will tell you that they have these experience of being in the zone. There was a book written in the 90s, I think, called Flow. I can't pronounce the gentleman's name.
Mihail Csikszentmihalyi or something like that.
Yeah, he recently passed. I think he recently passed away. But I think his idea is that when you flow, right, it's almost like things are moving in slow motion in your mind, right? So that when somebody is aggressing towards you, whether physically or verbally, and inside you're calm, right? Essentially, it's like you have all the time in the world to respond, right? And that sounds strange, but actually it's not, because all of us have had this experience, right? We tend to think of time as objective and discrete, right? But subjectively, when you're waiting in line at the bank, in those days when we went to the bank and we were allowed to wait in line, time passes extremely slowly.
Yes.
Right. It feels like you've been waiting an hour. You look, it's only been 1 minute. Right. But when, for example, you are having fun at a party, and you look at and you go, my God, has 4 hours passed? It hardly feels like 10 minutes, right? And so time is our perception of time is subjective, right? And so what the great sports people do and the great martial artists do is they actually have learned to slow time down in their mind, right? For those of our viewers, if there are, who are into trance work, or what they call altered state work, or hypnosis, that's called time distortion, right? And time distortion occurs naturally, and some people are able to deliberately slow time down in their minds to achieve whatever it is they need to achieve. A useful skill, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's about creating a little bit of space between the thing that happens outside of you and then your response to it. It's about responding rather than reacting.
Absolutely, absolutely, and I think it's captured in William Urey's book, Going to the Balcony. Right,
Yes.
the getting past no. Step one is go to the balcony. Right, go to that safe space. In NLP terms, we say that's just disassociation. You're going to third position.
Yes.
Right, which I recently saw on your LinkedIn. You were posting about the perceptual position. So you go to third position, right? And that's what you disassociate. You buy yourself space. You buy yourself time. You buy yourself balance, and then you can then critically assess what needs to be done at that point in time. Right.
And I think you referred to this in the article that you wrote about conflict resolution and martial arts, the parallels with that amygdala hijack experience, which is the sort of opposite of what you're saying. When something happens, you react, you lose the time. Everything's happening too fast for you to make sensible choices. And that's something that you train to react to or respond effectively to in martial arts. And in conflict, even though someone may not be physically attacking you, you have often the same experience, that fight or flight instinct and the emotional flooding.
Absolutely. I mean, and that's a survival mechanism. I'm not sure you can get rid of it, but you can manage it.
Yeah.
Right. And it's not. You're right. It's not just when someone physically threatens you. It's not when in a conflict somebody's shouting at you or you perceive that there is aggression. It happens, for example, when even in less or more innocuous situations, like for example, if people have some people have a phobia of public speaking, they have a fear of public speaking, and when it's kind of their turn and their heartbeat is going and they just want to run away, right? That's fight or flight, right? In something fairly innocuous, that's fight or flight. The other fight or flight response sometimes is I remember, I'm going to embarrass myself by saying this, but I remember asking a schoolmate out on for a first date, and your palms get sweaty and you don't know where your voice is, your heart is in your throat, it's like beating, you can hear your heartbeat and the blood, and that's fight or flight. And it's basically what we refer to as the arousal or excitation of the sympathetic nervous system, right? And there are ways that have been sort of established to help you sort of flatten that sympathetic nervous system response and to shift you into what we call the parasympathetic nervous system, right? Which is usually associated with relaxation, the alpha state, healing, sleep most of the time, and so you can manage the amygdala attack. I don't think you can get rid of it because you have an amygdala and it's hardwired. You can't help it, right?
So what would martial arts teach us about how to deal with that kind of a amygdala hijack? What could we take from martial arts training that we could maybe implement into our work as people who work with people in conflict?
Well, actually, interestingly enough, again, and we talked a little bit about this, which is the notion of balance, right? The mental balance as well as the physical balance. And physical balance can actually also be, when you're seated, how stable you are. I'm not sure if you're familiar. I'm pretty sure you are familiar with Virginia Satir, who sort of founded or pioneered systemic family therapy. And Virginia Satir had classified 5 types of communicators, right? Anywhere from sort of the blamer to the sort of like the placator to the computer, to the distractor. But the one thing that I think she tried to get all of her clients to be able to move towards is what they call the leveler. And when you speak as a leveler, you're balanced, right? You're balanced equally on 2 feet, front and back. Your hands, your movements and your gestures are actually symmetrical, right? By and large. And when you're seated down, it's the same thing. Your feet is flat on the ground and you're balanced. And actually, it's speaking from a space of great stability, right? And that's one thing that you do. Obviously, we don't always have the luxury of being that. I am not by nature a leveler speaker. I'm a distractor. If you haven't figured out already, I'm all over the place, right? I blame Robin Williams, who is one of my role models growing up. So you have that stability. The other thing that you do is breath, and it's no surprise that when we are stressed, we tend to either hold our breath or we actually breathe very high in the chest, right? So if you actually look at a baby breathe, you will realize that babies breathe from the tummy. Now, actually, they don't really, of course, breathe from the stomach. What it actually means is that they actually inflate the entire lung, so that when the entire lungs is filled, it pushes the diaphragm down, and the tummy expands, right? That's what it is. And people who sing in choirs will say you sing from your stomach, right? If you practice qigong, how do I interpret that? Energy work, right? Mm-hmm. They'll tell you to breathe from the stomach as well, right? And martial artists do this as well. But the interesting thing is when you take a deep breath and you hold it, right, and before you breathe out, right, usually on what we call the 4 count, what it actually does is actually it just slows everything down. It shifts you into parasympathetic nervous system. This is not just sort of sort of pseudoscience hoodoo. Yeah. The security forces use this. They teach soldiers and police personnel the 4 count, because obviously when you're about to go into a firefight, that's a very stressful situation, right? Mm-hmm. And so you need to learn to control the amygdala. There are constant stories about how when you're thrown into a firefight for the first time, you actually freeze. You don't know what to do. You can't fire. You can't move, right? Even though your life is in danger, and it takes some experience and skill to manage that. The scientific basis for this is actually found in a book, I think from the 60s by Dr. Herbert Benson. And the book is called The Relaxation Response. I think there are later editions. I read one of the earlier editions for my doctorate, but I think there are later editions now. But I believe it's still good science. And so medical science basically goes, deep breaths, okay, allow you to balance yourself. Mm-hmm. Now, the third thing that you can actually do is actually go into what we call peripheral vision. It's kind of strange. I love peripheral vision because I kind of space out when I do that. And who doesn't like spacing out, right? But medically speaking, scientifically speaking, your eyes have 2 types of cells, rods and cones, and I often get them mixed up. But one of them causes you to have foveal vision. In other words, you get to focus. So when you read something, when you do an eye test, that's what they're testing for, foveal vision. Okay. The other one detects movement, peripheral vision, right? So interestingly enough, when you actually are very, very stressed, people sometimes say they get tunnel vision.
Yes.
Right? That's just foveal vision, like super focused, right? Peripheral vision literally is you can't see details. So like right now I'm looking sort of at my screen through peripheral vision. I can see kind of 2 Sams. And you're nodding. I can see movement. I can see you nodding. I can see my fingers, but I actually can't see detail. But a lot of the time, I actually don't want necessarily to see detail, right? So if we go back to that saying, don't miss the forest for the trees. Sometimes you're focusing so hard on the detailed tree that you miss the big picture, right?
And doesn't that happen all the time in conflict? We get so focused on this one thing that might be the thing we want or the thing that we're aggrieved about, and we lose sight of the big picture and all the peripheral stuff that might open up other
Yeah.
opportunities or different ways of interpreting it?
Absolutely. So for example, as a conflict coach and someone who teaches conflict resolution, we get them to actually move away from whatever they are so obsessively focused on
Mm-hmm.
to something else, usually the bigger picture, right? So even if it's as fundamental as, okay, what's your interest? What's important to you about this, right? You're actually asking them to chunk up. You're asking them to see that bigger picture, right? If you're asking them, well, what's been your relationship in the past? What are your aspirations for the relationship in the future?
Yeah.
Ideally, what could it be, right? And I know you don't want it right now, but what could it have? Could it be,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? Is there value to it? You're getting them to see actually by expanding to the forest,
Mm.
time, right? If you begin to ask things about, okay, well, what is the nature of the relationship right now? How are you interacting? Has this got something to do with stuff that you're handling rather than actually about them?
Mm.
Again, you're expanding from that foveal focus to something larger than what they're. So they're not paying attention to certain things, and as coaches and counselors and as mediators, we sometimes say, okay, well, how about you look at these things and think about those for a moment,
Yes.
right? And we try to loosen this a little bit so it has some movement. And
Yeah.
that's why we reframe, right? We ask questions. We sometimes use humor. We tease them a little bit, right? And this is not politically correct, but I'll say it anyway. Or occasionally have to flirt with them a little bit in an appropriate way. In an appropriate way.
Yes.
Let me just be clear.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
Change the dynamics a little bit to be a bit more playful.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. And if you can actually start getting them to actually see the funny side of things,
Yes.
to actually laugh. The interesting thing is that it actually just causes something what we would term neuroplasticity, right? The idea is that then there's movement inside.
Mm.
They're no longer locked into the problem, because when people have a problem, they're locked in,
Yes. And
right?
when you laugh, you have to breathe, right? You can't hold your breath and laugh at the
Absolutely,
same time.
absolutely. So it represents really a shift, and so humor, for example, is underrated, not used a lot, but when the person using it uses it well, in a high intensity conflict situation, it actually just brings that tension straight down, and can be very, very helpful. But that's a different subject. I'm going off. I'm going off the reservation. I'm sorry.
No, not at all. It's fascinating. So of those three things, if I just kind of summarize my interpretation of what you've said, so balance, I love that. So it's about ensuring that before you engage in a conflict interaction, for example, that you're physically balanced. And that might mean being hydrated, not being hungry, had your cup of coffee if you needed one,
Absolutely.
not had too many glasses of wine if that's your habit.
Oh, not too much coffee.
Oh, not too much coffee, that's right. So that you're physically in the best shape that you can be if you have the opportunity to set up the intervention in that way. And the mental balance, I guess for me, the work that I would do with clients would be around being really clear about their values, the sort of person they'd like to ideally present themselves as, what's really important to them, so that when they go in, they're not confused about what's important to them or why they're there. So that would be my interpretation of the mental balance. And then the peripheral vision thing is fantastic, getting people to get out of their very narrow, simplistic focus into broader time, not just looking at substance, looking at process, looking at different possibilities. What was the third one? The third one was, the breath, the breathing.
The breath, yeah.
Such an underrated tool, isn't it?
Well, if you will remember the Karate Kid, the original Karate Kid, wax on, wax off, right? I think Miyagi said, it wasn't one of those lines that stuck in my head, right? Important, breathe, no breath, no life, right? And of course it must be true because I'm Asian and an Asian said it in a Kung Fu context. Just kidding. But I think the breath is important, and breathing deeply enough. What you just and there was I absolutely perfect understanding of it. To that, I would just add, I think, two things. It sort of just came up as you were talking. The first, interestingly enough, is sometimes when I do personal change work with people. So there's not a conflict. There's kind of counseling. One of the things I do is, if the problem actually involves somebody else, and most of the time it does, right? I usually say to them, can you sort of just imagine, sort of a big open space, and you and that person are sort of there, right? And maybe in the context that you usually create, have a conflict, right? And then what you will usually do is to ask them a couple of questions. Firstly, is whether that person is life size or not. Now, I know that sounds a little bit strange, okay, but it is entirely possible that if I feel intimidated by my boss, and I think I represent my boss in my mind as someone that's actually larger than my internal perception of myself, right?
Yes.
Sorry. And a lot of the times we respond unconsciously, we push back unconsciously because that's an internal image we're dealing with, right? Who wouldn't be intimidated, right? And what I generally get them to do is I actually get them to adjust that. So it's like using the sort of dragging arrow function.
Yeah.
make the boss's image life size, right? Or alternatively, make your image, because it might be that person's life size, but you're actually smaller, and it's in our language, right? He makes me feel small, right? It's in our language, right? And so if you actually make yourself life size, then see how that changes the interaction. That's one thing. The other thing sometimes is that this is going to sound strange. We see the other person, we are kind of here, but actually our consciousness is actually outside of our body, not disassociated, but sort of slightly out of alignment. It's like, you're half in, half out.
Yeah.
And sometimes that leads to incongruity, right? So if you find yourself not being able to congruently stand up and ask for what it is you want and assert, a lot of the time, it can be that sort of you yourself are not balanced in that context.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Or sometimes that person might be life size in your life size, but they're actually on a plane higher, so they are looking down on you. Right. So it's all these mental shifts that sometimes I do ask people, and I played around these ideas for years now, and when somebody says to me, "Oh, I can't negotiate with this particular difficult negotiator, or this type of difficult negotiator," I usually go, okay, and I just play around with that, and I go, okay, how do you perceive them? What size are they? Where are they relative to you, and all that? And sometimes it's just amazing. Just internally shifting this causes sort of the interaction to change.
Yeah.
Which basically means it's actually not about what's happening outside. Back to the self mastery point. It's actually what's happening inside that then affects outside. It's kind of one of those things.
It's so true. And as you were thinking, I think that I've gone a little bit backwards, but I was remembering some work I was doing once with a judge. So she'd recently been appointed as a judge, and she was finding it very difficult. She would get really angry or frustrated with people in front of her. She was doing mediation work, pre-hearing mediation work in a court context, and it was often family related. So people were very angry and emotional. And I was talking to her actually about breathing and meditation, and she said, I don't have time for that kind of stuff. Like, I don't have time in my busy life. And I remembered, I don't know where I got it from, but there's somebody proposed this 3-breath meditation, which is just 3 deep breaths. And I said, have you got time when you're sitting there on the bench with these parties or around the table to take 3 breaths? And it was really funny. She was like, really, that's meditation? I'm like, it might be. Why don't you give it a try? And she found just that the short time it took to take 3 breaths would bring her back into balance and calm down some of those amygdala hijack things that were going on, and would enable her to become more present and engage in a meaningful way. So that breathing doesn't have to be something very complicated, does it? It could be 3 deep breaths.
Absolutely. And I think the misconception comes from the fact that we hear about meditation. We have these images of people sitting on top of a mountain sort of for 5 years, or Master Shifu sort of from Kung Fu Panda going inner peace, and never really achieving inner peace. But essentially, if we understand that the word meditation, from a linguistic perspective, is a nominalization. It is what we call an abstract noun. And what an abstract noun essentially is a process that we've expressed as a noun. So really, it's not the process. It's not meditation per se. It's not something you attain. It's a process you engage in, the process of meditating. And when you meditate, it can be as long as short as you like. And if it means that, if you attend to the moment with just 3 deep breaths, takes you 10 seconds, right? Can you, for your own mental well-being, spare 10 seconds?
Yes.
And I'd like to think most people should be able to say yes to that.
Yes.
Right.
And one 10-second period every hour isn't going to take a huge chunk out of your day, is it?
No, it's not. It's not. And actually, and again, I say this to one of my martial arts students who happens to be doing a PhD. This guy's an eternal student, very intelligent. He just loves sort of these ideas. But he sometimes gets to this space where he goes, I don't have time to eat and sleep because I just got to get the work done. But without realizing that actually what you achieve in 1 hour is not fixed. So when you spend an hour in a suboptimal state, you might only be able to achieve, say, 50% of work. But if you actually are well rested in an optimal state, in 1 hour, you might actually achieve 200%, right? And so it's basically saying, take 10 seconds, invest 10 seconds, so that your other 59 minutes and 50 seconds, okay, will be more productive than if you did not take that 10 seconds.
Yeah.
Right. I think that's true of meals. That's true of taking care of yourself. That's true of sleep. True of even just giving yourself time for yourself, space, right? I mean, you don't have to be sleeping, read a book, whatever it is that sort of resets it for you, which is particularly important right now, the world today. Everyone's working from home, COVID. We don't have our usual outlets to reset, right? And I'm convinced in a couple of years we're already beginning to see the incidence of mental sort of health challenges that people are experiencing. It's going to get worse before it gets better, I suspect.
I saw something that that's a kind of a triter version of what you were saying recently, that was self-care isn't a reward for hard work, it's a prerequisite for hard work.
Nice. I like that. That's brilliant.
And that's not natural for many people. Some people are good at that, and some people feel like I've got to do it first and then I can relax. But as you're saying, often that's working against yourself because you're not as productive.
Well, interestingly enough, I just saw. I live on Facebook, as you know, and now called Meta, whatever that means. No, it doesn't matter. But fundamentally, I saw this thing which is the problems with the capitalism mindset. And that's not to say capitalism is bad. To extreme, it probably is, but the capitalism mindset basically comes from sort of the industrial revolution age. Time is money. You invest time. You don't want to waste time. I mean, it's all in our language, right? So therefore, you must be productive. Looking after yourself is not consistent with the capitalism mindset, because you're not making money. You're not being productive. So somehow we've bought into this idea that looking after yourself is not productive, and that's nonsense. I think fundamentally we have to look after ourselves and other people. Otherwise, this world will be a very sad place. I mean, and it goes back to collaboration, goes back to conflict coaching, and it goes back to that ICF talk that we did. Which is also growing a better world, I think, in a sense.
Yeah. What else? One of the things I also read, just maybe we could just use this as our last topic around martial arts and conflict resolution. One of the things I loved in what you were saying, actually, I'm going to lie, there's 2 things that I really loved that I haven't talked to you about yet. One was about adapting to the style of the other person. And I think you just gave a really nice example of how you might do that by reimagining them as smaller or lower down, or reimagining yourself as bigger or in a different location. And one of the things that I remember you talked about in the article was the distinction where people will often say, oh, I'm a collaborative negotiator, but how do I do that when the other person is being really competitive and aggressive? And you had some really interesting analogies that you drew with how you manage that in martial arts, because you're not always going to be, faced with someone who's the same size, the same style of martial arts. Right. I wondered if you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I'm gonna contradict myself here. So I'm gonna say two things, and it's just gonna be paradoxical because they're gonna conflict around it. But they're both true because I'm Gemini. I'm entitled to be the contradictory. That part is true too. I'm Gemini. So at one level, I think you must you must adapt to what's happening in front of you, right? Very often we go into any kind of situation, whether it is giving a speech or work context, or conflict context, a martial context, where we have in our mind what we think things should be. We think it needs to be like that. We have a plan, and damn it, that plan's gonna come to fruition, and of course, life and Murphy, right?
Only
That
that simple. We just make
if
it,
it was all
everything works out.
exactly. So sometimes fundamentally you're just going in, and you have to realize that the plan that you've made is kind of not what's happening in front of you. Just throw it away, right? And so in NLP terms, we say we acknowledge that the plan that you have, is not the territory, right? So if you're driving and you obviously have a route to get to your destination, but if that road is closed, you don't go there and crash the block. You don't go and say, "I'll never get there." You look for a different route. I mean, the map is not the territory, so respond to the territory. And there's a lovely saying. I think it is attributed to Fritz Perls, who is kind of the father of Gestalt therapy. Lose your mind and come to your senses.
Oh, I love it.
Right, and of course, all the folks out there who are into meditation and mindfulness will go, "Oh, I like that," because we are often a prisoner of our mind, right? Sometimes called the monkey mind, right? But actually, we're not responding to what's happening in front of us. We're not responding to our senses. One of the funniest things I've ever heard is if when somebody goes out on their first date. And the joke goes is that how many people are at that date, and the answer is actually at least 4, right? There's 2 of you, but actually you're not responding to the person. You're actually having internal conversations with yourself. You're talking to yourself, going, "Oh, she doesn't like me," or, "Oh, should I do this?" "Oh, she think of me?" "No, that's very strange." "Oh, that's a nice cat." That kind of stuff. And then also you might actually be having a conversation with that person in your mind, which you're projecting out. So they could be saying things that are entirely showing their interest, but because in your mind you have this sort of, thing, and you're not attending to what's actually happening in the room, your senses, you react. You just interpret whatever's happening through the filters of your own consciousness, right? And I mean, all this again is not pseudoscience pseudo. This is just in psychology. We know this. These are attribution biases. These are filters that we have that see these things. And so sometimes losing your mind and coming to your senses is basically saying, yeah, okay, throw away that map. Just open up your windows and say, okay, what's actually happening right now, right? And that can be very, very scary because you have no plan. You have no plan, right? And I sometimes take a leaf from the improv theater. What do you call some improv workshops? I like improv. I get before COVID, I used to get my mediation students to actually attend an improv workshop, and they have a lovely principle. One of their first fundamental principles is yes and. In other words, whatever's happening now, don't fight it. Go yes, and then build on it, right? So even if they're disagreeing with you, you go, yes, I understand, right? And help me understand a little bit more deeply about why it is that you miss it. And you're inquiring, and then from there you take them somewhere else, right? So that's one thing I would say is that you must adapt. You do a yes and. But then here's the contradiction. You have a style, you have an art, you have a way. My art is Wing Chun. My negotiation style, I believe in collaboration. I believe that's important. And I don't believe if just because you're facing somebody else who's a competing style or from a different art, that I somehow need to become that style to deal with that person. So my thoughts about adaptation don't actually extend that far, right? Because if you think about it, if he has spent 20 years being a competitive person, and I'm typically a collaborative person. I'm an amateur competitor relative to him, right? He will beat me with my inexperience, right? I think what's important then is can I be true to my collaborative style and still be able to be flexible enough to adapt to different styles?
And that's that balance thing, isn't it? If you're unbalanced,
Absolutely.
you'll be pushed over by their style. Whereas if you're secure in your style, you can be flexible without losing your grounding in what your values are and your purpose is.
Exactly. So in cybernetics and systems thinking, I don't even know if it's still current, but they used to say that it's called the law of requisite variety. The idea is that the system that has the most flexibility, that part of the system that has the most flexibility, usually ends up controlling the system, right? And I'm sure there are sort of mathematical calculations for that, but which I'll leave to better minds. I can't math. Actually, I'm pretty good at it, but not that sense. So that's where the paradox is, right? To adapt, but only in certain things, and to be true to that meta style in a sense. What is the bigger thing. And I realize some of our listeners will go, I'm not sure what that means, and that's okay, because I'm also still figuring out what the lines are. I can only share what I'm sharing.
What I'm visualizing is a metaphor that I've heard before, that the trees that withstand different sorts of weather have very strong roots but are flexible. That when the wind blows, they bend, they don't break.
I like that.
But they're not uprooted because their roots are really solid and secure.
I like that. I like that. And we've used that in buildings, right? I don't know about Australia.
In New Zealand, in Wellington.
They build. I mean, one of the reasons why they build buildings out of wood, at least, is because wood has give, and so because and because of the incidences of earthquakes, right? That is helpful. But New Zealand's not entirely the best example, because New Zealand generally doesn't have high rises. In Japan, they build tall buildings, to sway, and the swaying itself actually protects the building from earthquakes, because it's kind of scary if you're top floor and you're kind of moving like that, and you're not sitting on sort of like a football, then you're going, oh, it's an earthquake, right? But ironically, the movement doesn't make you weak. The movement makes you stronger, right? And that becomes actually a very not just a metaphor. If you've been to Hong Kong, I believe you have. We've also met in Hong Kong once.
Yes, I was there in a typhoon. I was there in a typhoon. Yes.
And actually, there was a documentary. I remember watching this in the 70s, where they were surprised that after the typhoon, the scaffolding that sometimes you use for buildings, the bamboo ones, the traditional ones, which are basically sticks which are tied together, were upright. But the metal ones, the ones that were actually constructed and supposed to be very solid, actually just all collapsed and fell over and rammed into the building. And again, it really is the idea that there must be movement, there must be sway, right? Because if there isn't that movement, and it goes back to a little bit like when we say somebody has a conflict or a problem and they're obsessed about it, they're really stuck in a very small box, right? And they've got developed tunnel vision, right? And there is no movement, and that's all they're staring at. And fundamentally, again, our job is to get them to go, okay, can you see this? Right? Can you begin to create some movement? And we do this obviously through the techniques that we do, or the language that we use, and all of that.
Great. The last thing, and I can't go without talking about this, and I know we talked about it at the ICF presentation that we did together, that there are two parts to this. There is managing our behaviors, the words we use, how we interact, but a lot of it comes back to our mindset, our inner balance, perhaps, if we put it in that way. And a lot of what's fundamentally important to how good you are at martial arts, how effective you are in conflict situations, is your mindset. And if you haven't got that right, the actions aren't aligned, and so you're sort of doomed in a way, aren't you?
Yeah, it's incongruence, right? if we are talking about a person that is, or if I mean, as you think about it, if you can think of somebody that you know that when they're listening to you, right, you're sharing a problem, or sort of the end of a bad day, you just really just, you just need to vent, and they're like fully present for you. They're listening. They might not be trying to solve your problem. They might not even be saying a lot. They might not even be saying the usual so aha and all that. They're probably not even doing the what I hear you saying, because that's probably just going to annoy you. But they're present. You can see that the light's on and somebody's at home, right? They're listening to you with their heart and their soul, with their entire body, right? And then you contrast that with somebody that I'm sure all of us have experienced, right? You're telling them something, and all they're going is but they're the lights are on, but they aren't really listening,
Yeah.
right? And that's congruence. I think, or rather, that's incongruence. And what you want to achieve is congruent, where every part of you is as present as possible, as you possibly can. Now that's difficult to do, right? So I would be lying. So my mind flits, right? I'm pretty sure that if I was born a little bit later and went through my school system, I would have been diagnosed ADHD, right? And as such, I was actually a late developer as a student. So I flip. So I don't multitask. I sequentially single task. So I can do like 7 things, but one, and I'll just rotate, right? Unlike my wife, who can just multitask. She can do 17 things at the same time, which is great. I can't do that. So I would be lying if I said that in this conversation I have been 100% present. That's difficult for me. I acknowledge that. But I like to think that in the moments that count, right? And again, it's a little bit like meditation, right? You don't have to meditate for 15 hours or 15 years. Can you take that 10 seconds when it counts? Can you take that minute when it counts, that 10 minutes when it counts, to fully attend to the person that you're interacting with?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
As opposed to living in a different space, right? In your head space, be there in the moment. And that's difficult to do, right? But to be congruent is a challenge, because a lot of the time people attend courses, trainings, and they say, oh, I know how to be collaborative. They really know the words of collaboration. They know how to say, oh, I believe in win-win, I believe in a long-term working relation, all that motherhood statements, right? Which actually, if said by somebody with the right mindset, most of us will say, we love you. But most of the time people are saying, oh, we believe in win-win. Yeah, right. Yeah, okay. We believe you know the word win-win, but bullshit, right? You're not really, manifesting the characteristics of win-win.
Yeah.
Right. And it's that if I say to my students, diffuse an aggressor, walk away if you have to, run away if you have to, make a friend if you have to. But the first time I respond to somebody who aggresses with me is with aggression, I'm not walking the talk, right? I'm not congruent.
Yeah.
Right. And I think fundamentally, it is a difficult thing. It is a difficult thing because there is nuance. But if I'm incongruent, how can I expect somebody else to be congruent with me?
Yeah.
Right. So in terms of the mindset, I'm sure that you are familiar with this thing. Right. So this is a video that I sometimes show my friends from Bhutan. I conduct mediation trainings for them. And this video is kind of cool because, right? So I'm sure you can see this video of these two gentlemen about to engage in a game that I think everyone is familiar with, right? And you could be forgiven, quite frankly, for thinking, you know what, there's going to be a competition. There's a competition right here, right? So for this game, for this context, okay, it's very easy to conclude the only way to do this is through competition, right? That must be the conclusion. That must be the conclusion. And you know that they're going to struggle, and the stronger person is going to win, and so on and so forth, right? But here's the reality of it. The purpose of the game, and again, we're focusing now instead of instead of positions, interest, is to actually get as many points as you possibly can. And the way of getting points is to actually get the guy's knuckles onto the table, right? And most people, if you come into it with a competitive mindset, will say there's only one way to play that game. In fact, the context dictates the way you play that game.
Yeah.
But let's just say, thought experiment, you had a collaborative mindset and you say to the guy, you know what, if the goal of the game is to maximize our points, how could we do this collaboratively? And typically what some people will do is this. Right. Now, I know this is not new for most people. I think they would have seen some variation of this, especially if you're a trainer in any kind of conflict resolution. And we sometimes get parties to do this, and it metaphorically communicates something. But it communicates something far more important about mindset. That we often conclude that a context dictates whether it's competitive or not. The activity dictates whether it's competitive or not. But actually, what if it was the other way around? What if your mindset dictated the nature of that context or the nature of the activity? If that were true, think about all the competitive contexts in the world right now that people typically are competitive. How different would the world be if everybody approached those contexts with a collaborative mindset, right? With a growth mindset, with a non-scarcity mindset, with a save the planet, we are all connected and need to work together, an Ubuntu sort of idea, right? How differently would the world be? I think it would be extremely different.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think part of that is this fear that we don't have the ability to control certain things, but often we have the ability to control a lot more about the context and the interaction than we recognize.
Yeah. Again, paradox, right? We can control many things, including ourselves, but fundamentally, and the Buddhists will go, yay, there is no control. We really don't control anything at all. Right, what will be. It is what it is, and the most we can really control, the space in which we have control, is how we respond to those things. Nothing else. I can't control my spouse. I can't control my cats. God knows I can't control my cats. You can't control your children. You can't control anything other than how you respond in any situation, whether you're doing it proactively or reactively. Right, and if you can respond proactively by setting up the frames and using, in mediation, we do this all the time. You set sort of frames that are useful to the resolving of the conflict. You use your language purposefully. You make a friend. You build rapport. All of those things are well within your control. Whether you succeed in, getting them to build rapport with you and feel that they have connection with you, that you got no control.
Maybe the control word is the problem. Maybe if we thought about it as what capacity might we have to influence our environment, others, by what we do, by controlling ourselves, how might we influence others? That gives a sense of possibility, doesn't it? A sense of openness.
Yeah, absolutely. And in psychology, we have the concept, as you will know, or called the self-fulfilling prophecy, right? I cannot count the number of times that people have come back to me and said, I changed me and it somehow changed them. And I don't know why that happened or how that happened. And I mean, from my perspective, it's real simple. When you didn't change you and you were just habitually doing whatever you did, they just simply were being triggered by you. They just basically were responding to what you were, right? But once you changed you, they suddenly went, oh, hang on a moment. Something's different here, right? They're not pushing my hot buttons anymore. There's space to do something else. Wow, okay. And then it changes, right? And I've heard this consistently over the last 20 years, whether it's students with their parents, people with their spouses, their children, sort of die-in-the-wool enemies, that somehow, if you can change you or change the way you're doing things, you actually change the dynamic. Which I feel fits, I think, fully back into sort of conflict coaching.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Wow, what a great discussion, Joel. I love the way that your mind flips because it's always so fascinating where it goes.
ADHD, ADHD.
No, it's awesome. It's awesome. And so many, there were some beautiful sort of one-liners that I can see as, Facebook quotes, Joel Lee. There was at least 20 in there, I think,
Thank you.
one-liners that had so
You're
much
most kind.
magic in them.
Just do a hashtag. It's all right.
Yeah, hashtag Joel joke. Or
That's right.
Joel wisdom. We'll have to have the Joel wisdom one as
We
well.
gotta find
Careful.
one. I haven't figured it out yet, but most of the time it's just a Joel joke.
But maybe, yeah, we'll have to balance the Joel joke side with the Joel wisdom side now. I think there was a lot of.
Yeah, I'm at that age where I'm not sure I can be wise anymore.
You don't think you can be, or you don't want to be.
I think so. I think there might be the one too.
I love it. Thank you so much, Joel. I'm sure everyone's going to be completely energized and fascinated by all the things that you had to share.